I think about my childhood and my schooling and all of the things that I haven't learned. But there are all these things that I have in my head that have been ingrained. All the images, like Washington crossing the Delaware, and how it made me feel as a child revering Washington. But then I discover Washington's story, and like everything, it's complicated. Like people's Facebook posts, it's complicated. So Washington is complicated, Jefferson is complicated. And peoples of color's experience here in America, black people's, is complicated. The relationship to history, patriotism, it's all complicated. And I think some things are always oversimplified, but it's never that simple. With that particular work and the story behind that work, it talks about a raid that Harriet Tubman led with Union soldiers in South Carolina. And that's a story that I had never heard about when I was growing up in South Carolina. And I never really knew about Harriet Tubman's story. I knew the name Harriet Tubman, but not her particular story. And I think for the viewer to see this work and to know that it's about Harriet Tubman and comparing Harriet Tubman to George Washington, people will wonder, like, what is going on there? Why is that? Like, what is the correlation? And so I hope when people see the word Combahee, that they will look it up and figure out, okay, she did this. She's an important person. I know that's a lot to ask of the viewer, but I hope that one person will do it at least. Some of those fabrics come from old stashes that my mother had. Some of it would be going into quilt shops and finding the exact right piece of fabric that I need, and then bringing them together. One thing that I don't think I've ever mentioned is the idea of collecting materials. So here's me, this big black man, going into these quilt shops that are shopped primarily by older white women. And so every time I go into a shop and buy things, there is always this curious look that people are giving me, like, why are you in here and what are you doing? So I often find that when I go in these spaces, I have to explain what I'm doing, and I'm showing what I'm doing, and then they're like, oh, that's nice, I'm impressed. And so when I put those materials in the work, like, all of that energy goes into it. There is this explaining and this interpretation and gathering materials, and there's an explaining and interpretation of the actual work. I have to physically, like, get the energy to go into the shop. I sort of regroup myself, and then I go in there, and I interact with the people usually that are selling, so they're not scared of who I am. And then it's just this whole process. So quilting has sort of brought new and different things to me that I never thought that I would ever have to experience. There are parts in the process of making quilts that does take a lot of energy, the actual designing of it. The beginning of making work is always hard. That is probably one of the hardest aspects of making this work. And then it's not until I'm almost finish it that it's like, okay, this is good. It's always like running a marathon, I think, because I don't make works that are just like quick brush strokes and quick expressions of energy. It's always a lot of time and a lot of meticulous work. And so I sort of think of making this work as running a marathon. This is gonna be hard, and sometimes I don't want to wake up and do this. Like there are some days I don't want to do this, but I realize that I have to do it to win the race. And that's how I feel about making a lot of my work. I hope that one day somebody will look at a Stephen Towns painting or a Stephen Towns quilt, and they'll say, like, why is this happening in this painting? Who are those people behind this image? And how do I relate in this?